Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I am part of the education team at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I'm on Meredith Creek, and Meredith Creek is the site of Chesapeake Bay Foundation's original and longest running environmental education program called the Arthur Sherwood Center. So I would like to get you in the canoe with me, and I would like to take you to some of my favorite spots along this creek. My goal is to get all the way up to the headwaters, to look around, see what it looks like up there, talk about the land use and over time, how the land was used and how that affects the health of this creek and the different habitats of this creek. We can look at the edges, along the edges as we go. We'll paddle back down right past our dock. There's a spot with a marsh. If the tide is high enough, we can actually float our canoes right into the marsh, and that's a great spot to talk about all the important functions of that habitat. And then right near there is an area where it's shallow. It's kind of a shallow sandy area, and that shallow water habitat is a great spot to find small critters, all the little guys, all the things on the bottom of the food web or the food chain. So we're gonna check it all out. Let's get geared up. So let's just jump right into it. I'm gonna get suited up and we'll hop into those canoes. All right, here we go. So I've paddled up to the headwaters of Meredith Creek, and behind me you can see that the creek gets a little bit more skinny, and there's some wetlands up there, and the creek kind of zigzags or winds through that wetlands and gets more and more shallow, and eventually goes through some culverts or some underwater pipes, and it passes underneath the highway. You might be able to hear the highway behind me, but that's Route 5301. And the pipes pass underneath on both the eastbound and westbound lanes of that highway. And then on the other side of Route 50, there's all these little feeder streams that come together, and that's where the water kind of feeds in and comes into Meredith Creek. So in those shallow parts of the creek, that water's gonna start moving faster, right? It's gonna have some speed to it. And then it gets to this part. This is the widest part of the creek. It's kind of like this shallow cove. And when the water gets to this shallow cove, it's gonna slow down. And when that water slows down, any of the solids that are suspended in that water column, those solids, the heavier solids, are gonna go ahead and settle out in this area. Some of the lighter solids or sediment particles are going to keep flowing, but the heavier stuff is going to settle out here. So I want to figure out how deep it is here. So I've got a 4-foot long paddle. I'm going to put it over the side. Oop, that was pretty easy. Touch the bottom. Let's see, right around here. So it's about 3.5 feet deep here. Historically, any of these shallow areas would be just one big giant underwater forest. All the underwater grasses, all the underwater bay grasses would be down there, and it'd just be this whole forest of underwater grasses. But as I'm paddling, I'm not seeing any evidence. I'm not seeing any grasses broken off, any grasses floating. The water's not clear enough for me to see the bottom. I only have about, I have less than a foot of visibility. And it's been really, really windy yesterday and rained all morning today. We had a crazy thunderstorm last night. So right now I've got less than a foot of visibility. So one way I want to check out the bottom then is to send my paddle down there. Let's push my paddle down as far as I could push it, and I'm going to pull it back up, and we're going to take a look at it. Try not to spill it in my bag. So if you can see on my paddle, I got it this far down in the mud, so that's a lot of thick mud. And when I take a look at that mud, it's really, as I rub it in my hands, if I had to describe it, it's very, very fine, very soft. It's not chunky. I don't see any bits of root material or plant material. I don't see any kind of worms or little amphipods, little things that would live in the benthic, science word for bottom, in that benthic zone or that benthic area. And it's kind of got like a green color to it. And it really doesn't have any kind of smell. So if it smelled like rotten eggs, I would say, okay, so there's a problem with decomposition going on, anaerobic decomposition, but it just smells pretty plain, pretty normal. So if this soil is so fine, that's a lot of fine sediment and stuff that may have washed over the land and been deposited here. This is going to be way, way too fine for any of those underwater grasses to set their roots in there. They really can't hold on. You want to see a real chunky humus or organic material. You want to see a lot of organic pieces and parts in there. So even if the water was clear enough for me to see the bottom, those underwater grasses cannot root in here because the years and years and years of all of that sediment deposition. I happen to know a little bit about the history of this area, and historically this was all farmland all around here. So you think about years and years and years of deforestation and farming practices, and so the soil running off from that, and then unfortunately when we started to lose our farms, they started becoming housing developments, and then with those housing developments, more soil was cleared, and the opportunity for more runoff, more hard impervious surfaces like rooftops, driveways, sidewalks, roads, more areas for it called impervious, where the water's not going to soak in, it's just going to run off. So more of those impervious areas, and so when the rain hits those hard impervious areas, that rain's going to hit it and get moving downhill. And the faster that water moves, the more pollution it could potentially carry with it. As I paddle back to our dock on Meredith Creek, I want you to notice the banks of the creek. There's a few different ways that humans have changed the shoreline along here. And you can see some of the different methods engineered by humans to prevent erosion. If you see the rocks all stacked along there, that's called riprap. If you see looks like a hard wall, that's called bulkheading. And then there's some natural areas where it's natural grasses or plants. Some of the shoreline, like on this side of the creek, some of the shoreline is left natural. Here's an example of a section of the creek that doesn't have any strategies or methods to defend the shoreline, and we see a lot of erosion, we see a lot of trees down, you see a lot of banks that are kind of cut under, so the erosion is cutting into the banks and causing erosion underneath the roots of those plants, and eventually that will collapse. Here's a neighbor's house. They're using a bigger size rock along the front of their home that again, it's that riprap, and these rocks are set up in a way that, yeah, they're going to provide all kinds of nooks and crannies and hangouts and hideouts for different things living along there. So the plants all around me are, people call them common reed. Another name is Phragmites. And the Phragmites, all the golden brown colors that you see around me, that's all dead stuff. That's from last year. And the new stuff is coming in. Let's see if we can see some. There's a lot of green. Let's see if I can turn. There's a lot of green new shoots coming in. Yeah, that's the new stuff growing. And Phragmites grows pretty fast. It's very similar to bamboo, where it's got the different segments and they're hollow inside, and it grows pretty fast. The furry tops, that's your seeds. So it seeds from the top there, that little feathery tuft. But it also shoots out rhizomes, these root systems where it'll shoot out a tuber and then new plants will sprout off of that. So the Phragmites has a really, really thick root bed, and that it does a great job at holding the soil together. And these plants grow at a tremendous rate, so they do a really good job at taking up nutrients and using nutrients, taking the nutrients out of the water and locking it into the plant. So they're using those nutrients when they're growing. But they're pretty invasive. Their roots are so thick and they're so tall, they crowd out a lot of the native wetland plants that might otherwise be here. So there's a lot of debate about Phragmites. So this wetland has a lot of nooks and crannies in it. So it's a really good habitat. A lot of ducks are attracted, birds are attracted to this area. In the higher parts of the marsh of the wetland, deer will bed down. You'll see raccoon tracks going through here. And then there's all the aquatic life in here. Our wetlands are really good nursery habitats for fish. I'm gonna compare. Let me see how deep it is. So I just grabbed a handful of the stuff off of the bottom here, and it's leaves, like it's a blanket of leaves. Now all these different leaves that came off the trees last fall are sitting down there, and they're starting to decompose, they're starting to break down, and that's going to be food for a lot of organisms, and that's also going to put nutrients. The decomposing leaves are going to release their nutrients into the soil, and that will be available to be taken up by other things growing. So this is a roller net that I just used, and I just rolled through the neighborhood here. Let's see if I can feel some stuff moving around. Oop. Oop. Just dropped most of them. Oh, here's a little fish. Some shrimp. Some leaves. So all of these shorelines, all of these edges are places that provide a valuable habitat for a host of different species. And a lot of times in the shallow water near the edges, that's where you're going to find your nurseries. That's where you're going to find your little guys. So minnows like this will come in here to lay their eggs, and then the babies will hang out in here till they're big enough to venture a little bit further out into the deeper water. Little grass shrimp, like that one, moving across, will be here, and that grass shrimp, whether it's a full-grown adult, like the one that just swam by, or whether it's the eggs or a newly hatched out grass shrimp, they're such an important part of the food web and the food chain. Also in this shallow water, I caught a juvenile blue crab. So that's the kind of crabs we eat. That's just a little teeny tiny one. And the way that I know, even though he's super tiny, is those back fins, those swimming fins that he's using to suspend himself up in this water column. There's only a couple of crabs that are swimming crabs. Everybody else has all walking legs. So even though he's pretty small, I know he's one of those blue crabs because of his swimming fins, and they are known to be the beautiful swimmers, right? That's part of their name, tasty, beautiful swimmers, Calanectus sepidus. But that blue crab, that crab has got to find a place to live and grow. He's got to find the food that he needs. And then that crab will, let's see if I can get you lower. That crab will shed his exoskeleton, I don't know, 18 to 20 times before it reaches the size that we like to eat them. And when they shed their exoskeleton, they are completely vulnerable, right? They don't really have any defenses. So they need good hiding spots. They need places where they'll camouflage, where they'll blend in, places where they can hide, places where they'll be safe during those molting stages. So we're back at the dock at the Arthur Sherwood Center, and I hope you enjoyed paddling with me on Meredith Creek.